The rain had been falling on the outskirts of Sevastopol for 3 days straight, turning the trenches of the 25th Rifle Division into rivers of cold mud. The woman they called Lady Death sat motionless in the wreckage of a burned-out farmhouse, her Mosin Nagant bolt-action rifle resting on a collapsed wooden beam. Senior Sergeant Lyudmila Pavlichenko had learned that comfort was a luxury for the living, and out here, on the bloody edge of the Soviet front lines, death was the only currency that mattered. She was 24 years old, though the war had carved years into her face that would never show on any calendar. The Ukrainian woman with auburn hair pulled tight beneath her wool cap had already killed 187 fascists in the Odessa region alone, but Sevastopol was different. Here, the German command had sent their best, specialist snipers from the Berlin Sniper School, men who had hunted game in the Black Forest, and men in the streets of occupied Europe. They were patient, professional, and deadly. Lyudmila adjusted her aim by a fraction of a millimeter, watching a German supply trench through her PE scope. The rifle felt like an extension of her body, the same way her arms and legs did. She had first learned to shoot in a sharpshooter class as a young girl in Kiev, earning the Voroshilov sharpshooter badge that would later prove invaluable when recruiters tried to dismiss her as just another woman seeking glory. Now, that skill meant the difference between waking up tomorrow or becoming another statistic in the casualty report Stalin's officers tried to hide. Her spotter, a young soldier named Leonid, who had attached himself to her after she saved his life during an ambush near Odessa, lay pressed into the dirt beside her. He was barely 19, with eyes that had seen too much and a hand that trembled slightly when the artillery shells came too close. "Senior Sergeant," he whispered, his voice barely carrying over the wind and rain. "Movement, 200 meters, the burned-out tractor." Lyudmila had already seen it. A German soldier, probably a runner, darting between positions. She could have taken him easily, but that wasn't the mission. Intelligence had reported a high-value sniper operating in this sector, a man they called the Jaeger, a hunter who had supposedly killed over 80 Soviet officers. Her job wasn't to kill runners. Her job was to find him before he found someone important. "He's hold," she breathed. "He's bait." Leonid looked at her with the awe he always carried. "How do you know?" "Because he's too careful to be careless and too careless to be careful. He's showing himself just enough to draw fire." She lowered her head, pressing her cheek against the cold wood of the rifle stock. "They're hunting us today." The rain continued to fall, and Lyudmila began the long, patient process of scanning every shadow, every unusual shape, every reflection that shouldn't exist. This was the part of sniping that most people never understood. The hours of stillness, the control of breath and thought, the ability to exist in a state of suspended animation while your body screamed for movement. She had once spent an entire day in a tree, unable to shift position even when a spider crawled across her face, because a German sniper was somewhere in the field below, waiting for exactly that kind of mistake. An hour passed, then 2. The light began to change as the clouds thinned, casting the battlefield in a sickly yellow glow. And then she saw it, a reflection so brief she almost missed it. A lens, catching the dying light from a position in the second floor of a bombed-out grain silo, 300 meters to the east. "There," she breathed. "Grain silo. East window. He's been there the whole time." Leonid raised his binoculars carefully, moving with the slowness of a man who knew that speed meant death. "I see him. Just a shadow. He's good." "He's about to be dead." Lyudmila began the slow process of shifting her aim, millimeter by millimeter, never moving fast enough to catch a trained sniper's peripheral vision. But not yet. "We wait for the light to change again. In 20 minutes, the sun will be behind us and in his eyes. That's when he'll make his move, and that's when we take him." The waiting continued. Lyudmila thought about Kiev, about the university where she had been studying history when the war began. She had dreamed of being a teacher, of explaining to children how the world worked and why the past mattered. Now she was writing history with a rifle, one bullet at a time. When she had first tried to enlist, the recruiters had laughed at her. They suggested she become a nurse instead, as if a woman's only purpose in war was to clean up the mess men made. She had pulled out her marksmanship certificate, earned years before through the Aviacum paramilitary organization, and demanded a chance. Now, they gave her a rifle and pointed to two Romanian collaborators in the distance. She killed both without hesitation. They stopped laughing. The sun broke through the clouds, just as she had predicted. The western-facing window of the grain silo suddenly blazed with orange light, and she saw him clearly for the first time. A large man with a scoped Mauser 98K, shifting position to account for the changing conditions. He was good. Very good. But he had made one mistake. He had assumed the hunter was a man. Lyudmila exhaled slowly, let her heart settle into the space between beats, and squeezed the trigger. The crack of the Mosin Nagant echoed across the battlefield, and through her scope she saw the German sniper jerk backward, his rifle spinning away into the darkness of the silo. 300 meters, a moving target, a difficult light conditions, a shot that would have made her instructors at the sniper school outside Moscow nod with grudging respect. "Hit," Leonid confirmed, his voice filled with wonder even after all these months. "He's down." Lyudmila didn't celebrate. She never did. Instead, she began the process of withdrawing, sliding backward from her position while keeping the rifle trained on the silo in case there was a second shooter. "Record it. 36 sniper kill. Now let's move before his friends come looking." They crawled through the mud for 50 meters before rising into a crouch and moving through the communication trenches back toward their own lines. The artillery had started again, the Germans' nightly ritual of softening up Soviet positions before dawn, and the ground shook with each impact. Lyudmila moved through it like a ghost, her feet finding the dry spots, her body leaning into the concussions, as if she had been born to them. Back in the main bunker, the division commander, a gruff Georgian named Colonel Kovtun, was waiting with a bottle of vodka and a rare smile. "Pavlichenko, they're saying you got another one. That's what, 300 now?" 257 confirmed, she corrected, accepting the glass of vodka he poured. She didn't enjoy the taste, but refusing would have been an insult. "The one today makes 36 enemy snipers." Kovtun shook his head in amazement. "The Germans are offering a reward for you, you know. Chocolate, a promotion, the whole thing. They broadcast it over their loudspeakers last week. Come to us, Lyudmila. We'll treat you like an officer." He laughed. He'd a harsh sound that turned into a cough from the cigarette permanently attached to his lip. "I told them you'd rather have their balls on a plate." Lyudmila allowed herself a small smile. "They also said if they catch me, they'll tear me into 309 pieces and scatter me to the wind. They've been counting." "Let them count. Every number they know is another one of their best men in the ground." Kovtun's face grew serious. "But you need to be careful, Pavlichenko. The Jaeger was their best in this sector. They'll send someone else. They always do. Let them send whoever they want." Lyudmila set down the empty glass. "I'll be waiting." 2 weeks later, a young sniper named Grigory joined her unit. He was fresh from training, full of enthusiasm and theories about the best way to kill fascists. Lyudmila took him on as a student, teaching him the things they didn't teach in the schools: how to read the wind by the way grass moved, how to tell the difference between a soldier's walk and an officer's walk, how to survive when everything went wrong. He was eager, smart, and careful. She began to think he might actually make it. They were working a sector near the Mackenzievi Mountains, a brutal stretch of rocky hills where the Germans had established strong defensive positions. Grigory was in a secondary position, meant to cover her flank while she worked on a German machine gun nest that had been pinning down a company of Soviet infantry. The shot was clean, a single round through the machine gunner's head, and Lyudmila was already preparing to withdraw when she heard the crack of a German rifle from an unexpected direction. And not from the nest or the support trenches, but from the ridge to her left, a position she had cleared just hours before. She rolled into a shell crater as more rounds chewed the dirt where she had been lying. By the time she found cover and raised her rifle to return fire, the shooter was gone. A professional, she realized, a counter-sniper sent specifically for her. "Grigory," she whispered into her field phone. "Status." Silence. "Grigory, respond." Nothing. She waited until dark, then crawled to his position. She found him lying where he had been, his scope still trained on the German lines, a single bullet hole through his temple. The German sniper had outflanked them both, killed her student, and then used the shot to draw her attention while he moved to a secondary position. It was a classic move, executed perfectly. Lyudmila sat with Grigory's body for an hour, not weeping. She had forgotten how to weep somewhere around her 200th kill, but memorizing his face, the way his eyes were still open, the slight smile he always wore when he thought he'd done something right. He had been 19. He had wanted to be a history teacher, just like her. She found the German 3 days later. He was set up in a church bell tower, using the height to observe Soviet movements. She had to crawl through an open field under mortar fire for 2 hours to get into position, but she got there. When she finally had him in her scope, she didn't shoot immediately. She watched him for a full minute, watched the way he moved, the confidence in his shoulders, the casual way he lit a cigarette despite being in a combat zone. He thought he was untouchable, and he thought he was the best. He was wrong. The shot was perfect, through the scope and into his right eye. As he fell, Lyudmila felt something cold settle in her chest. Not satisfaction, not grief. Just the quiet certainty that she would keep doing this, keep killing, keep surviving, until the war ended, or she didn't. June 1942 brought the worst fighting yet. The Germans had massed for a final push against Sevastopol, throwing everything they had at the Soviet defensive lines. Lyudmila was in a forward observation post, directing artillery fire onto German positions when a mortar round landed 20 meters away. The shrapnel caught her in the face. She didn't feel it at first, just a hot spray, and then suddenly the world was red and she couldn't see out of her left eye. She kept directing fire for another 10 minutes. Using her good eye and the coordinates Leonid fed her, until a lieutenant physically dragged her to a medic. The medic took one look at her face and swore. "Senior Sergeant, you need to be evacuated, now." "No." She tried to stand, but the world tilted and spun. "My unit." "Your unit will manage. You're no good to them, dead or blind." The medic injected something into her arm, and the world went gray. "That's an order from the colonel himself. You're too valuable to lose, Pavlichenko. Let someone else die for a while." She woke up on a hospital ship bound for the Caucasus, her face wrapped in bandages, the steady thrum of engines telling her she was leaving Sevastopol behind. The nurses told her she was lucky. The shrapnel had missed her eye by millimeters, and she would see again once the swelling went down. And they also told her that her kill count had been officially confirmed at 309. 309 fascists, 36 enemy snipers, and a city burning behind her. The recovery was slow and frustrating. Lyudmila hated the hospital, hated the inactivity, hated the way other patients looked at her with a mixture of awe and fear. She was a hero, they said. The most successful female sniper in history. Lady Death herself. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt like a soldier who had been pulled from her post while her comrades were still fighting. But the Soviet command had other plans for her. In July 1942, just 2 months after leaving Sevastopol, she was summoned to Moscow and told she would be going to the United States. The Soviet Union needed allies, needed supplies. It needed the Americans to open a second front in Europe. And who better to make that case than the woman who had